in making. Our topic today is gonna be public sector, private sector, consumer protection. This is all going to be taught by teacher MITALA Ivan from Seta High School, Mukono. I want to repeat, we're going to handle public sector, that is privatization, consumer protection. This topic is normally taught or covered in senior 4, though some schools handle it even as early as senior 3. So let's go right away to our topic of the day, public sector. What is public sector? This consists of establishments owned and controlled by the government on behalf of the public. Or we can say the term public sector means government involvement in running of business or businesses through setting up its own enterprises, or what we call government enterprises. The public sector comprises of public corporations, parastatal bodies, and local authorities. It's very important to note that all government enterprises are managed and directed by the board of directors appointed by the central government. Now we're going to look at each independently, each one of them, of these components of the public sector independently. I already told you that it comprises of public corporations, it comprises of local authorities, yes, and it comprises of parastatal bodies. Let us talk about public corporations. These are joint stock companies in which the government holds either all the share capital or majority of it. It is usually created by the Act of Parliament, which clearly defines its aims and objectives. So when we talk of public corporations, we are talking about a joint stock company which is governed by government, either by way of owning majority shares and share capital, or owning it all, that is public corporation. Yes, if I'm to talk about examples of public corporations, you must be knowing some of them, like Uganda Railways Corporation, National Water and Sewerage Corporation, Uganda Broadcasting, UBC, Uganda Broadcasting Corporation, yes, the former UTV, it is now UBC, and so many other corporations or public corporations. So below are some of the examples: National Water and Sewerage Corporation, Umeme, yes, and many others. Parastatal bodies. Parastatal bodies are business organizations which are wholly or partially owned by the government to perform certain functions. These functions may not necessarily be commercial functions, or may be a body aiming at making profit. So I repeat, parastatal bodies are organizations, are business organizations which are wholly or partially owned by the government to perform certain functions. These functions may not necessarily be commercial functions, nor may be a body aiming at making profits. Yes, I want to give examples of parastatal bodies. For example, in Uganda, 1, marketing boards like Coffee Marketing Board, Link Marketing Board, and so many others. The other part of the public sector is local authorities. Local authorities may also perform certain commercial functions like supply of water, bus services, construction of primary schools and secondary schools, sports stadium and sports clubs, so many others. These are set up by local authorities, yes, or by the Ministry of Local Government to provide services to the people. Yes, I think you have heard of examples like you can give examples like KCCA, Kampala Capital City Authority. The word authority brings it out very well. Number 2, talk about our district local governments. Yes, talk about our local councils. All those ones are local authorities. They find ways of sensitizing the public, the members of the community, to solicit, to raise money, which money can be used to perform certain functions. For example, providing school facilities, making sports clubs. For example, you have heard of KCC Football Club. Yes, you have heard of your local football clubs around your nearby communities. Yes, however, these local authorities are faced, yes, with very many challenges, as you will see in future. But before we look at the problems or challenges of the local authorities, let us look at what problems are faced by the state-owned enterprises as a whole. Yes, number 1, corruption and embezzlement of funds. Some government officials misappropriate the enterprises' money for their own interests. I hope you know that. Number 2, there is a problem of inadequate funding by the government and foreign bodies. Inadequate funding, whereby the finances available or the finances availed are not enough to run the activities of the local authority. The problem of lack of personal initiative by people managing them. Yes, this is due to lack of interest by the managers. Majority of the people doing public business handle things the way they want because they know it does not belong to them as individuals. Then there is lack of skilled manpower. This is due to practice of nepotism, tribalism, and very many other vices, yes, in recruitment. Hope you know such issues. People appoint friends, appoint tribe mates, yes, and so many others. There is stiff competition from private companies, yes, like communication companies such as NTV competing with UBC. You can't expect UBC to, you cannot equate UBC to NTV in performance, yes, because UBC is state owned, it's government owned, and NTV is private owned. Therefore it has to do much better because there are very many reasons why a private business should perform better than a government owned business. Look at NBS, look at very many other TV stations and radio stations that are doing better than those that are owned by the state, by the government. There is long decision making. I said long decision making process due to bureaucracy, that red tape kind of management whereby you have to consult different stakeholders. It delays a lot of decisions, unlike for private sector whereby the owner decides very fast. Yes, here in public sector it's very hard to decide because you have to keep consulting different stakeholders. The other point is that there is a problem of political interference, that is to say appointment of political employees without required skills. So people end up fighting those that are appointed with the necessary qualities, and they agitate for those without qualities, but because they have their political ideologies at hand, so they mix business issues with politics, because you can't separate the government with politics, and yet business is supposed to be a separate entity. Yes, once you mix business with ideologies, then you have no business, and that's why majority of the public owned businesses end up failing. Anyway, let us look at the ways in which the government gets involved in commerce, because some people may not know how really the government gets involved in commerce or in trade, because commerce means trade. Let us look at some of them. Number one, by setting up public corporations that operate on commercial lines. E.g., you have heard of National Water and Sewerage Corporation. Hope that is clear. The other one is through setting up parastatal bodies to perform specific functions within the economy, like marketing boards. I gave you examples of marketing boards. Yes, lint marketing boards. Yes, and coffee marketing board. So many others. The third one is through local authorities. Yes, to provide certain essential services which may seem unprofitable to the private sector, e.g., street cleaning, garbage collection, public toilet facilities, health centers, yes, and so many others. So basically those are the major three ways in which the government gets involved in business or in trade. Yes, and those are the three sections of the public sector. However, there are other ways through which the government gets involved in trade, and among which the following includes: number 4, through consumer protection, by setting up various laws aimed at protecting consumers against exploitation. Yes, consumer protection, many candidates mistake it for international trade protection, which we nicknamed protectionism. This is completely different from protectionism. This is consumer protection, whereby the government sets up certain measures with an intention of controlling the rate at which consumers are exploited. Hope you know traders are good at exploiting consumers. So to avoid such unnecessary exploitation, the government may decide to set up different measures aiming at protecting its citizens against exploitation. Another is through ministries like the Ministry of Trade, Tourism and Industry. Such ministries, help in the allocation of public resources, other than having all resources allocated to one line of business, and yet the needs of the people in the country vary, their various needs. Yes, different people in different communities have needs being directed towards different items. So it's up to the government to decide on which area should concentrate on which facility. The other one is by influencing location of certain businesses so as to achieve fair and even distribution of all businesses all over the entire country. So you have seen many different parts of the country being gazetted to perform different functions. For example, we have seen in Namave industries have been cropping up. In Imbalala, here in Mukono, industries cropping up, and now those two have become serious industrial areas. Yes, having realized that Jinja had no more space for industrialization. So many others. Then the other point is by imposing taxes through URA, Uganda Revenue Authority. Yes, so by doing all that, the government is involved in trade. It also gets involved in trade by setting up necessary infrastructure for commercial activities and industrial development. For example, public warehouses, for example, roads, for example, rooms for rent, and so many others. Another one is organizing trade fairs or participating in UMA, Uganda Manufacturers Association Trade Fair and Exhibition. By doing so, the government is getting involved in trade. Another one is through providing security to business community like local and foreign investors. Through providing security, giving them security. Security, what do I mean by security? Security takes two forms. One, providing guards, for example, LDUs. Yes. Two, giving them confidence that they will exist even after today. That is all security. Another one is through setting up prices for certain goods, that we call it minimum and maximum price legislation. A situation whereby the government sets the minimum price. Why do they set the minimum price? To protect sellers or producers against exploitation. This normally protects agriculturists, because when it is an harvesting season, some farmers suffer a lot. You may find them selling a kilo of maybe beans at 200 shillings, a kilo of maize at 250 shillings, and then these people who don't do farming, who just buy from the farmers, take all that in their warehouses, wait for the price to rise a bit. When the demand has dropped a bit, when the prices have gone high because of limited supply, they will hike the prices. So the government sets up such policies to control exploitation of farmers. However, the government can also set up a maximum price for the commodities, such that consumers are not exploited by dubious sellers and producers who want to maximize profits during times of scarcity. I think that's all about that. Let us look at the differences between public corporations and limited liability companies. I'm very sorry for giving you such differences between public corporations and limited liability companies before teaching you what limited liability companies are. But allow me to first give you these differences. As time goes by, I will still hope you to understand public limited liability companies. But maybe before I go to the differences, let me briefly give you a hint on the meaning of limited liability companies, because I have a belief all of you have ever studied about what we call business units. So limited liability companies fall under business units. Business units are like they include sole trade, partnership, and majorly joint stock companies. Now, joint stock companies take two forms. They can either be limited liability, private limited liability companies, or they can be public limited liability companies. Yes, but all in all, both are called joint stock companies. They are either called joint stock companies, sometimes they are called the public companies, sometimes they are called the liability companies, sometimes they are called the limited liability companies. Where do they derive their name of limited liability companies? Because majority, if not all, of the shareholders here, their liability is limited. By liability we mean their responsibility towards payment of the business debts. Their liability only ends, or their responsibility ends with their capital contribution. Their liability towards the payment of business debts only ends at that point of losing their capital. So if the business has got very many debts, what they can only lose is the capital they contributed, but no one can go into their personal or private property to sell it in order to pay off the business debts. However, we have already talked about public corporations. These are owned by the government, and now we are talking about limited liability companies. These are owned by the private individuals. However, let us go straight away to the differences, because there are a number of differences, and maybe the differences will give us a better picture on how best we can understand public corporations and limited liability companies. The differences themselves have got a better meaning of what we're talking about. So these differences are summarized into the following headings. Number one, motive. The main motive means objective, and the main objective of public corporations is to provide essential services or goods, while the main motive of limited liability companies is to make profits, full stop. Liability companies only want to make profits, but public corporations only want to provide essential services such that the members of the public don't lack. Number 2, formation. Public corporations are formed by the government to provide the nation to provide nationwide services, whereas limited liability companies are formed by registration under the Companies Act. Yes, so it is the registrar of companies that registers them, that in order to come into existence. But public corporations come into existence by the act of the parliament. Then the other one is sharing of profits. Public corporation profits are enjoyed by everyone, every member of the public, but liability company profits are only shared by the shareholders, those who contributed capital. Let us talk about another one. Public corporations are mainly formed as statutory monopolies, while limited companies are liberalized. So public corporations, like, are monopolists. That's why we are calling them they are mainly formed as statutory monopolies. What we mean here, you cannot wake up any day and say, I want to make to make a company distributing electricity, yes, in Uganda, because Umeme is a monopolist. Yes, it is taken over by Umeme. Umeme is the only recognized distributor of electricity, HEP. Yes, whereas companies are liberalized. Liberalization means everyone can start up his own business without any problem. Yes, any refusal. Maybe the other one is management. Public corporations are controlled by directors appointed by the state, while limited liability companies are controlled by the board of directors, who are always elected by the shareholders. Financing. Public corporations are funded by the government, yet limited liability companies are funded by shareholders. Hope you know that shareholders finance liability companies, whereas public corporations are funded or financed by the government. I think that's all about that. Let us talk about the reasons for setting up state-owned enterprises. Give reasons why the government owns some enterprises. Number 1, to undertake ventures which require large sums of money private sector may not manage to invest in. For example, look at airline companies, railway corporations, etc. Number 2, to reduce the exploitation of consumers. Most investors are profit-oriented, and therefore they may exploit the public through charging high prices. Hence, there is need for government to control enterprises providing the services. This is done by UNBS. I hope you know that. Number 3 is to undertake risky ventures which can't be left in the hands of the private business. Yes, production of firearms, for example, is fully restricted and controlled by the government to promote political stability. You cannot find anyone bragging around. You can't find anyone licensed to sell guns, to sell bullets in any trading center. Yes, because of security issues. Another one is to undertake non-profitable ventures which private sectors may not want to invest in, or may be reluctant to invest in e.g. supply or collection of garbage, providing public toilets, sweeping the city streets. Many of the private individuals may not want to go into such businesses, and yet they are highly important, necessary. Another one is to provide employment opportunities. Yes, some parastatals are set up to provide employment opportunities to people. This helps to reduce the level of unemployment in the country. Jobs like teaching, doctors, accounting officers, engineers are provided. Another one is the need to promote proper resource utilization. Where all economic activities are left in the hands of the public, of the private investors, there may be competition, and this creates resource over exploitation. Therefore, the government may be involved in business so as to control resource exploitation. Another one, to ensure economic stability. Some parastatals, that is parastatal enterprises, are set up to ensure economic stability in the country. e.g. Bank of Uganda was set up to control stabilize and regulate economic activities. Hope you know it is Bank of Uganda that regulates money circulation in any country. Sorry, Bank of Uganda is, of course, is for Uganda, but I'm talking about the central bank. Every country has got its own central bank, and that of Uganda is called the Bank of Uganda. So it's responsibility to control the circulation or the flow of money in the country. The other one is to raise government revenue. State-owned enterprises act as a source of revenue to government. For example, Uganda Revenue Authority does that. Revenue is raised through selling goods to the public, imposing taxes, profit made by public companies, etc. Public corporations, not public companies. The need to control foreign dependence. The government wishes to reduce foreign dominance by setting up industries to produce goods which were formerly imported. So if you reduce on importation from certain countries, you are gaining independence and reducing dominance. Another one is to control monopoly power. This is a situation where there are many buyers but only one seller. Yes, so government may want to get involved and provide the same service as the monopolist has been serving in order to reduce on his exploitation rates. Then another one is for political considerations, that is to say, as a way to tap foreign assistance like loans, grants, etc. You can tap foreign assistance or foreign aid. Another one is to boost competition between public sector and private sector. Yes, without having the government getting involved or owning its own enterprises, we may not have competition, and where there is no competition, even efficiency is not assured. I think that's all. Let us look at the disadvantages of state-owned enterprises. Before I go to the disadvantages, I have to remind you that once you are asked to give reasons, yes, for reasons, the qualifier is supposed to be two. All your answers must begin with the word two. Yes, reasons why. Answer begins to. You don't begin with because. for disadvantages, we shall begin with it if it is one, and they if they are many. Yes, and maintain the S tense. Yes, for example, the first disadvantage is it leads to lack of profit motive. Yes, lack of profit motive leads to absence of self-drive and motivation by administrators. So there are many points here. You can choose anyone. You can say leads to lack of profit motive. You hope you know the reason, because you are doing something that is not yours, it is for the entire public. Or you can say it leads to absence of self-drive. You choose the one that is better for you, as long as you back it up with some explanation. Another one is poor quality goods and services may be associated by government enterprises. This leads to low levels of utility because of lack of interest. Some people do things inefficiently and they may end up having poor performance. Another one is diseconomies of scale, because state-owned enterprises are always big enough. Therefore, the larger the business, the larger the possibility of diseconomies of scale. I already told you that diseconomies of scale are the disadvantages that come as a result of expanding in scale of operation. Another one is monopoly may be created due to lack of competition, yes, with the private sector, especially if this private sector is laid off, yes, from business, and we only have public sector. Corruption, embezzlement, and mismanagement may arise since the managers are politically appointed. Yes, political influence is a great problem in business. Some state-owned enterprises are loss-making, and losses sustained are passed on to the general public. So one major problem of public enterprises is that majority of public businesses owned by the government are loss based. They make a lot of losses. It is very hard to find any government owned enterprise that makes profits. So loss making is almost part of their DNA. Another one is they tend to be run under strict bureaucratic administration, what we call red tape. This leads to delayed decision making. I already talked about that. Another one is where competition is applied, public companies are usually outcompeted by more efficient enterprises because of the experts that are always employed in the private enterprise or private sector, which is not the case with public sector. NB. Allow me to talk about nationalization. Yes, because nationalization and privatization move together. Nationalization is the move taken by the government to take over and control certain industries or businesses owned by the private sector. Okay, let us talk about public revenue. Public revenue refers to total income of a country. That is what we call public revenue. The sources of revenue of the government include the following. These are the sources. Number one, taxes or taxation. 2, loan from international or external borrowing. 3. Fines, penalties imposed on lawbreakers who then pay money to the government. Gifts, grants and donations offered by developed countries. Yes, those are some of the sources of revenue. There is also profits earned from state-owned enterprises, because some state-owned enterprises make some profits. For example, Bukete, compulsory saving schemes. Yes, for example, National Social Security Fund. That is a compulsory scheme. It collects a lot of money, and that money is helping the government to do its own business. Another one is licensing of business as a way of giving licenses. So those licenses are paid for, and that is another source of income. From privatization, sale of government-owned farms to individuals is also a key factor to look at today, because when you talk of nationalization and you don't talk about privatization, you have not said it all. So I want you to also understand that much as nationalization is the transfer of formerly privately owned enterprises to the hands of the government, even there is a possibility of privatizing, and this process of transferring ownership from the public sector to the private sector is what we call privatization. Yes, so privatization brings money to government. Another one is from rates. Payments made on urban private property, land, houses, etc., also bring in revenue to the government. Okay, let us talk about taxation, because taxation is one major source of income to the government. What is a tax? A tax is a legal compulsory payment made by individuals, businesses or firms to the state, irrespective of what they are to get in return. So I hope you all know that a tax is a non-quid pro quo payment. It is a non-quid pro quo payment, without meaning that it is a payment that one makes without expecting any necessary or any equitable return. For example, it is not true that you are supposed to be given an equivalent of what you pay as a tax. For example, if you pay 20 million or 2 million as a tax, you may even never use 200,000 shillings of the money you paid as a tax, because it is a non-quid pro quo. You don't pay taxes to be given back or to be paid back in return equitably. No, instead it is just a mandate. You are supposed to pay taxes as a responsible citizen, not expecting any returns. That's what we call, that's where we advance our name of a tax being a non-quid pro quo. payment. Let us talk about the classification of taxes. We have direct taxes, and these are taxes imposed on incomes of individuals or organizations, and their impact cannot be shifted. The incidence cannot be shifted from the taxpayer to another person. Yes, there are different. Let us look at the different forms of direct taxes. Number one, personal income taxes, and these are taxes charged on incomes of individuals, e.g., pay as you earn, paye. Number two, graduated tax. This is no longer in existence, but it used to be. We used to have it before 2001, I think. We had before 2006. We had the graduated tax. It was a tax paid by all adults, especially those above 18 years, with an exception of students. So those who were above 18 but still students used not to pay it, though the government experienced a lot of challenges with this form of tax, because even the adults who were working, who were no longer students, parents could put on uniforms and they go to work. Then when they reach work, they remove the uniforms and they put on clothes for duty, their duty stations. Not until they realize that the form of tax is so unfair and not well managed, and they removed it. They replaced the graduated tax with other serious taxes. Even I remember, if I'm not mistaken, in the elections of 2001, when Besigye, Dr. Kiza Besigye had just come, he promised to abolish graduated tax once put in power, and Museveni Kaguta Yoweri decided to abolish it immediately. So there was no reason to vote for Besigye anymore, since the reason he had come with was no longer rational. So that's when we last saw graduated tax. However, that form of tax was so unpopular in the country, and whoever could fight against it would definitely win any form of elections. That's why you no longer hear anything to do with graduated tax, because in Uganda we don't have it. Then we have another form of tax, and that is company corporate tax. This is tax charged on company profits. Yes, and in Uganda it is already 30% of the profits made by the company. Another type of another type of direct tax is capital gain tax. This is a tax which is imposed on capital assets. Yes, you know capital assets. They include fixed assets that are used to run the business, things that the business can't do without. Yes, they are long-term assets. Those are capital assets. For example, buildings, land, machinery, furniture, etc. Then we have estate duty. Estate duty, that is sometimes called death duty or death tax. It is a tax that is imposed on the property of the deceased. Yes, it is charged on the property of the deceased. So before the heir inherits the property, the government must charge it some tax, such that the people learn to work for themselves instead of dreaming to only earn or improve their standard of living basing on other people's sweat. So that's why the government deducts some percentage, certain percentage of what you receive, what you share as a heir of the deceased. Another one is inheritance tax. It looks like death duty, but this one is charged or imposed on the inherited property. Death duty is charged before property is shared. So it is charged, death duty is charged on the property of the deceased before sharing, and inheritance tax is charged on the property that has been inherited, already shared. So that's all about direct taxes. We also have indirect taxes. Yes, these are taxes imposed on goods and services, and the burden of indirect taxes can be shifted. In fact, it is always shifted or felt by another person. The person who pays it is not the one who feels it. Instead, the one who feels it is that one who consumes the final product on which the tax is imposed. People pay such taxes upon consuming goods and services on which indirect taxes have been imposed. Let us talk about the forms of indirect taxes. Number one, ad valorem tax. Ad valorem tax is the tax charged as a percentage of the commodity value. Yes, just as you hear the word ad valorem, it considers the use of the commodity. Then we have two, specific tax. Sometimes it is called the per quantum tax. It is a tax charged on a fixed amount per unit of the commodity, regardless of the value of that commodity or that good or service. So specific tax is the difference, is the opposite of ad valorem tax. Let us talk about excise duty. Excise duty is charged on locally produced goods produced locally here, but ready for consumption. So excise duty is charged on such. Then we have import duty. This one is charged on goods entering the country. Export duties, this is charged on goods leaving the country to be sold abroad. Then number 6, we have sumptuary tax. Sumptuary tax is a tax imposed on the consumption of commodities, and its major aim is to control people's consumption of such goods that are harmful to their bodies. That's what we call sumptuary tax, like the taxes imposed on cigarettes, warrage, and so many others. Then we have value added tax. Value added tax is a tax that is charged on goods and services at their different stages of production and distribution. I won't talk so much about value added tax, but all I know is that this type of tax, it's charged at different stages of distribution. Let us talk about sales tax. This is no longer popular. It was substituted by VAT, or value added tax. This tax is imposed on the sale of goods and services, so it depends on the total sales. A and B. Let us define some of these key words. Tax base. Tax base refers to the economic activities on which taxes are imposed. Then let us talk about tax burden. Tax burden is the direct impact of a tax that is felt by that person who pays a tax. That is a tax burden. Talk about tax incidence, the final resting place of a tax. The person who feels it finally is the tax incidence. Remember, I told you that indirect taxes, their burden can be shifted from the payer to the consumer, to another person, and this is the instance I'm talking about, and so many others. So let us talk about the principles of taxation, or canons of taxation, or the qualities of a good tax. Number one, the principle of equity, that is fairness. This means that the burden of a tax should be distributed fairly, whereby the rich are charged highly and the poor are charged also fairly. Then the principle of certainty. This principle states or contains or assumes that the tax imposed should be certain to the taxpayer and the tax administration. The taxpayer should know the amount of money to pay as tax, and the tax collector should also know. The taxpayer should know when to pay and from where to pay and even how to pay. Yeah. Then we have the principle of convenience. The tax should be paid. The taxpayer should be allowed to pay the tax when it is highly convenient to him, in form of time to pay, place to pay, and so many others. Then we have the principle of simplicity. The principle of simplicity states or contains that the tax should not be complicated to understand by the taxpayer or tax collectors. All of them should be understanding the type of tax the same way. Another one is principle of elasticity or flexibility. The tax should be able to change in response to the change in the levels of income. Where the income is going high, then the taxes can go high. Where the levels of income are going low, the taxes should go low. And the other principle is the principle of economy or cheapness. The tax should be cheap to assess and collect and administer. It is very dangerous for the charges, the money incurred, the expenses incurred in the process of administering a tax. It is very awkward for the expenses to be more than the total taxes collected. You use 10 million to collect taxes of 1 million. That is not fair. So that is the principle of economy or cheapness. We have another principle, and that is none other than the principle of efficiency. The principle of efficiency should have this principle states that there should be little excess burden. Yes, the change in behavior caused by the taxes should not be so much, should be fair. People should not change so much because they are paying taxes. So we have the principle of productivity. This is the ability of a tax to achieve the purpose for which it is imposed. So if the purpose is to raise government revenue, we need to see the government revenue being raised, not just to collect taxes and the taxes are not seen. So another principle is the principle of acceptability. The tax should be socially, economically, and politically accepted. You remember OTT was not supported by all stakeholders, and that is why up to now it is not yet popular. Then we also have another principle, the principle of neutrality. This the system should be neutral. It should minimize the distortion of relative prices, so that the government is able to reduce the problem of income inequality. The main aim is income inequality, and that is all about that. Let us try to look at the reasons why there is need to levy taxes in an economy. Number one, I told you begin with the word to for reasons. To raise government revenue. Number two, to redistribute income. Number three, to control inflation. Number four, to control monopoly power. Number five, to protect domestic industries. Number six, to discourage dumping. Number seven, to direct investment and resource allocation. Number next, to correct balance of payment problems, and so many others. Let us now look at the role of taxation. Yes, whereas for reasons we use to, for roles we use ing tense. So you are supposed to say raising government revenue using the same points as we have given. The same points are coming back, but in a different arrangement. Previously we used the to. Now here we're going to use ing or shown tense. For example, I have already said raising government revenue is one role of taxation. Number two, protection of home infant industries from foreign competition and dominance. So remember I told you for roles use ing or use shown. I think number two has shown protection. The element of shown is being had, and yet number one has ing raising. Number three, controlling inflation. Taxation is set up. Taxation is always aimed at controlling inflation, reducing people's income, and not income but money at disposal, and putting it in other ventures. Then another one is discouraging importation and consumption of harmful goods. Another one, reducing dumping, imposing high taxes on goods discourages dumping. Yes, imposing high taxes on dumped goods discourages such goods from coming into a given country. Then another one is controlling monopoly. Taxation enables the government to reduce on the monopoly power of firms. You know, I already told you what monopoly is. Yes, dominance of one seller in a given market. Another one is reducing income inequalities. Reducing income inequalities. Hope you know that when you tax the rich, you reduce some of their income, and you exempt the poor ones from paying. That is very important. Then another one is improving the balance of payment position by charging increase the taxes or high taxes on imported goods. Another one is encouraging hard work. You have to work hard in order to be able to pay the tax imposed on you. Another one is discouraging over exploitation of resources. Taxation can be used to discourage of over exploitation of resources by raising over exploitation for the exploiting firms, by raising taxes higher, by charging higher taxes to exploiting firms. Then the other one is the promotion of economic growth. Taxation policies are used by the government to influence the level of economic activities. Hope you know that. I think we can also talk about compliance, tax compliance. What is tax compliance? This is the degree to which a tax-paying community meets its tax obligation as set out in the appropriate legal regulatory provision. So, tax compliance is the level at which the taxpayer is willing to pay a given tax imposed on them. Tax compliance, compliant taxpayers make a timely, proper, and accurate declaration of their wealth to the tax authority, such that they can levy correct taxes to them. Then let us talk about the various levels of tax compliance. We have we always say that it depends on the taxpayer's attitude. Yes. What do we mean here? We are talking about levels of tax compliance, and they're saying that it depends on the taxpayer's attitude and knowledge. There are strictly 4 levels of tax compliance, and number 1 is taxpayers who are fully compliant, and such taxpayers fulfill their tax obligation voluntarily without being coerced or forced. Now we have another category of taxpayers who reluctantly comply. These are taxpayers who know that non-compliance would be expensive and they decide to comply because they fear penalties, but not because they want. Then we have another one, taxpayers who show slight resistance to compliance. These resist a bit, but later they pay because of fear for penalties. And finally, we have taxpayers who are non-compliant at all. They exhibit real resistance to meeting tax dues and they completely don't pay. Let us talk about the factors influencing compliance. Compliance has got factors influencing them. Number 1, the extent to which tax system is equitable. An equitable tax system encourages tax compliance, and that is non-equitable discourages. Hope you know. Where there is no equitable allocation distribution of tax burdens, then there is always resistance. Number 2, the extent to which the tax law and the regulatory framework is easy and simple to understand. Simple and easy law regulatory framework encourage tax compliance. Yes, and that is difficult to understand also discourages people to be compliant. Another is the extent to which tax laws and rules are applied. Yes, and consistency. Some tax laws are not consistently applied, so this gives room to evaders and avoiders to find ways of dodging taxes, and in the process they don't comply. Then another one is the extent to which the tax burden is spread to all potential taxpayers. Where the burden is well distributed, tax compliance is high, and where the burden is not well distributed, tax compliance is low. People keep on resisting. Then another one is the rate of tax. Yes, the tax rate. A high tax rate discourages compliance, and a low tax rate encourages tax compliance. Then the quality of tax administration. Poor and improper tax administration leads to non-compliance, but good tax administrators encourage compliance. Hope you know that. Then popularity of the government. Where the government is loved, where the government is a darling to the citizens, they are highly compliant, and where the government is not loved, full of corrupt people who embezzle money of the state, such governments don't encourage compliance at all. Then the quality of business management, yes, by the government and taxpayers. So bookkeeping helps tax assessors, yes, to assess correct taxes, and therefore this encourages compliance. But where there is no good bookkeeping, people just guess the amount of tax to be imposed, and in the process people resist such taxes. Let us talk about the problems faced by tax authorities. They face a number of problems, and number one is difficulty to understand some taxes, especially indirect taxes. Some people don't understand those taxes. Number two, inadequate record keeping. Yes, some businesses don't have records, therefore it is hard to assess taxes for them. Corruption among the tax officials. Some tax authorities, some tax officials, some tax collectors embezzle the money. Inaccessibility of some parts of the country, hence discouraging certain tax officials to reach such areas that are impenetrable. Another one is low tax base. There are few activities, yes, that can be taxed in the country. Yes, majority of the people are dealing in illegal activities which cannot be taxed. They are in the informal sector, which is not well recognized, therefore you cannot tax them, and so many others. So with all that, allow me to end my lesson here.
Hello students, I pose a simple question to you. Are you a computer student at O level or A level? Ask yourself, are you good in computer in both theory or computer practical? Either ways, I urge you to look for this book called Direct to Points, Information and Communication Technology, Computer Studies. It has the best notes ever written. Notes in O level, it has summarized notes, questions and answers. It also has a set of number questions and answers. But there is another one, also direct to points, the bulldozer. It is known as the bulldozer. This book can guide you in practicals step by step. It is having a DVD of practical tutorials for free. So go in any nearby bookshop, whether Kampala, Mbale, Tororo, anywhere in the country, and obtain the best book for you. However, some students admire, their dream is to become computer programmers, great computer programmers. But some never make it. They don't become programmers. They even go to universities, but they do not become programmers. It is because of low foundation. How do you build a foundation? Come here and get this small book here called Direct to Points, Elementary Programming and Web Design. You will learn all the foundations of programming. It has also web designing using HTML. Now, it has also a DVD of video tutorials to simplify your learning. Now, what is the essence of this book? For O level, it is part of the syllabus. But if you are at A level, during your vacation, don't hesitate to get this book and practice to prepare yourself a computer programmer. When you join university, you should have the foundation. Else, at the university, they come out, they can't program, they even hire people to do programming for them as a project part. Can you imagine who will employ you when you can't program? So get the book and gain the foundation. Then If you're at A level, there is also another book for A level called The Examiner's Words. It is direct to points, but the book is known as The Examiner's Words for A level or subsidiary ICT 3rd edition. Get that book and enjoy. Mind you, the writers of these books, they won a great Uganda Book Award as a best academic book of the year 2019. So do not undermine these writers. They did a good job to come up with those computer books. Read them with great faith, knowing that you are going to perform. I personally, I wish you the best performance and achieve your dream. Do not spoil your future. Work hard as you watch tutorials. Thank you very, very much. Keep on thinking about it. Thank you very much.